And we're live. Hi, and welcome to Homo Ludens, the channel on history and board games. I'm very excited for today's live show. I actually suspended my YouTube break for this one and took a couple of hours of work because we had a very special guest today. And it was just too much a great opportunity to miss out. And also the topic is going to be very, very exciting. So thanks all of you for joining. And today we're actually welcoming Rodney Smith, who accepted to come to the channel to talk about his learning coin experience that some of you might have seen on Twitter. And just for context, Rodney Smith is the host of the channel Watch It Played, probably one of the biggest board gaming channel on YouTube, 233K subscribers, I think, which is quite insane. And I think that they will be celebrating their 10 years anniversary this August. It's a channel that I discovered through their awesome Rules Teach video. So I'm very excited to have Rodney here today. And hi, Rodney.
Hey,
how are you?
Fred. I'm very good. Thank you for the very kind introduction. I did not realize you took 2 hours off of work to make this happen. Thank you so much. This was a good time of day for me, and I really appreciate you accommodating me that way. That's lovely. Now I better help put on a good show.
Now you need to deliver, Rodney. Like,
yes.
My boss are watching and they are thinking, after this, you have to work 2 extra hours to catch up to all that. So I hope this Rodney guy is worth it.
Oh,
so
boy.
No, but it's awesome. Yeah, I'm really happy that you took the time to actually come and talk to us on the show. I'd like to take maybe a couple of minutes to say hi to everyone in the stream. I know that for some of you it's very early, some of you it's very late, and it's a bit of an unusual time, but I think it's nice because for once we can actually have people in Australia and people in the US seeing us at the same time. So maybe it's more democratic in that way. So I think it's actually quite great. And as it's usually the case, so for the people who are watching this live, remember that you can put your comments in the box below, and I would be happy to push them on screen and ask the question to Rodney. And if I don't push your question straight away, it's maybe because I see an opportunity to link it to another part that I wanted to discuss. And if you watch this after the live stream, I usually put some time codes with some sections in the video depending on the topic. So feel free to look at the description and navigate where you want to go. But here we are today. And maybe before we start this discussion, and that's what we talked about, Rodney, I think my theory is that everyone will know you. That's the theory that I have. But then you said, well, maybe some of the grog nerds won't, like some of the audience that we have.
I don't think I used that word.
No, I did. I used that term. I used that term, and I will take the blame. They say maybe your audience don't necessarily know who I am. I would be surprised, but I think it would be nice, just to if you could briefly introduce yourself.
Sure, I'll do it very briefly. You mentioned it earlier. I do have a YouTube channel called Watch It Played, where the focus historically has been to teach people games, go through the rules with them, and then in separate videos sometimes do full playthroughs so they can see the game in action, right? Just try to lower the barrier to entry into games that maybe they've purchased or they're thinking about buying. And now the channel's grown over the years. We have other shows on as well, and other hosts doing top 10s and more playthroughs and lots. And the wargaming crossover kind of happened a little bit a couple of years ago. 2 years ago, I think, I did the tutorial video for Sekigahara. And that was probably one of the first, what we would classify in that kind of wargame space game that I featured. Though, of course, the definition is different for lots of different people, right? But that, and then recently I did 1960, The Making of a President. Yes, I have been playing more and more war games of late, for sure.
This is interesting, and we'll go back to this later. But and just a small teaser before we go into the subject of today. Are you planning on having even more wargaming videos in the future, or it really depends what comes in?
It really does depend. I would certainly be open to it. My schedule tends to be quite full. I am fortunate to be able to do this as a full-time job. But about 3,000 board games release a year. And I can feature about 50 to 55 if I'm going flat out. So you can imagine there's all kinds of fantastic, amazing games I just never get to and would love to. But I certainly hope to do more. Because I like on the show to do a diversity of games, whether it's party games or Euros or Ameritrash, as they're sometimes known as, and war games. I like doing just everything.
But that's great to know, and maybe a call to publishers. You should contact Rodney. I think for some of your games that would be great, and we're always very happy to see war games featured on the channel. So the reason I invited you today is because a couple of months ago, I think it was in April, I'm not sure, but you started posting those cryptic videos on Twitter, some of them on Cuba Libre and then on the whole coin series. And the coin player community reacted very positively to this. Like they got super excited. We have our own Discord. We have our own Discord channel server over there, and we were like falling into the rabbit hole, and people got really excited. So that was kind of fun, and I thought, well, it would be actually great to have you come into the show and talk a bit about your experience, because I thought that as a non-wargamer necessarily, and we'll probably talk about your relationship with wargames, but as a heavy board gamer, understanding how you felt about the series, the struggles that you were confronted to in actually playing the game and learning them, I thought it would be a super interesting perspective. And maybe before we start talking about this, for the people who might not know what I'm talking about, I'm going to push one of those Twitter videos that you actually did a while ago. So just you see a bit the context. I think this was the craziest one that I've seen. And when I saw that, I was like, I really need to reach out to him.
All right.
Well, I figured it was time for a coin update. Cuba Libre sits here, all set up and ready to go, and not being played. But that's because I currently have a game of Andean Abyss going. My first 4-player game of coin. All of them have been either solo, 2-player, or 3-player, because those are the only other possible combinations. Also currently playing a game of A Distant Plane, and currently playing Colonial Twilight. All of these remotely. And I think this weekend I'll be playing a game in person with friends of Cuba Libre. I will say this. I think learning 4 coin games at once is, I don't recommend it. It's a fair bit. I'm having a blast with all of them, but I think it's sort of like learning to juggle 3 balls and then putting a 4th one in. It's astronomically more difficult. Coin update.
Here it is. And I mean, I thought, wow, that escalated quickly. It came from a short video about Cuba Libre, and then next video you had actually 4 games laid out, trying to learn all of them at once. And I'd like to know, Rodney, how did it come to this? What happened?
If I only had more tables, I would have more of them set up, Fred.
But that's yeah.
How did it come about? Oh boy! Where do you want me to start?
So first of all, because I think you mentioned in an earlier video that a while back when the series started, you actually bought Andean Abyss, and I think you or Cuba Libre and didn't play it. And I just wanted to know what was your relationship with the coin series specifically. Yeah.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. It was I think it was around October in 2012. Joel Eddy from Drive Through Games did his review of Andean Abyss, and I'm a good friend of Joel's, and he raved about this game, and I watched the review, and it seemed really interesting to me. 4 asymmetric factions, each with their own objectives, unique actions, the historical element. I actually started my entry into the hobby with war games when I was really young. My first, I guess you'd say, game beyond Monopoly and Risk and those sorts of games was wargaming. I was in a it's weird. There was a store here where I live in Canada that sells pool tables and war games. It's a weird combination, but they had a catalog for some war games, and I was flipping through it, and I saw one game in particular called Empires in Arms. Maybe some of your viewers are familiar with it, and it fascinated me when I read the description of what the game was, how it played, and then I saw it had an 80-page rule book, and I believe it said it played from 120 to 12,000 minutes long. I don't know. Quick math on that. That's, I think, 200 hours.
That's a lot,
yeah. To me, like, so, and this is maybe an insight into the way my brain is wired. I think most rational people would run screaming from that. And I was like, just fascinated. I was like, what could that even mean? What could have 80 pages of rules? Like, what is that trying to simulate? That's what it told me, is like, this is trying to simulate something to like almost a granular level, to me. Now, obviously it's not very granular. It's a very wide sweeping game. But Yeah, that was fascinating to me. So I asked my parents, like, I don't have the money for this game. Will you pay half? I'll pay the other half. And they agreed, and I bought the game. And of course, I never played it with anybody because no one else was going to go at that age, was going to dive into that with me. I didn't have anyone locally who was interested in that. Then, thankfully, I found this beauty. I know you asked me about Andy and Abyss. We'll get to it. Then I found this beauty, Ambush, which is a solo war game. And this was incredible. I mean, this was exactly what I needed. It gave me that kind of depth of simulation, the historical setting, adventure. It allowed you to build out your own squadron of fighters, name them, give them stats. I mean, I went on these grand adventures and stories with them, and it was really fantastic. This is actually not my original copy. Someone very kindly sent me this when I no longer had my original copy because I just wanted to kind of have this as a part of my library since it was such a formative game. So when Andy and Abyss came along, I was kind of curious to maybe like dip a toe back in to wargaming. And I bought the game. I started to set it up. I started going through the rules, Fred, and I got, I gave a pretty good effort. I was like a couple hours in, and what started to dawn on me was, first of all, I wasn't really understanding or following much of it. I was reading the words, and I understood what the words meant, but I didn't understand how the game played, really. And I started to have this sort of oppressive feeling of, even if I ever do figure out how to play this, how will I teach it? And who would ever want to play it with me? I couldn't imagine anyone, again, in my local game group, and the kind of games I've been playing, that this would be attractive to. And that was a little bit discouraging to me. I said, you know what, maybe I shouldn't bother. And so I just packed it away, and I actually sold my copy of the game. But it sat in the back of my head, Fred, like an itch that I still was like, my friend Joel had said how great it was. I kept hearing about coin games and how great they were. Although like my eyes weren't focused on the wargaming side of the hobby so much, I still have an interest and pay attention through other YouTube channels like the Player's Aid and other channels. And I was like, these sound interesting. I kind of want to get back to it, but I don't know. Can I? And it was actually Harold Buchanan. I think I started playing Twilight Struggle, and I was maybe tweeting about that a little bit. And I was playing that with a good friend of mine. We were playing lots of games back to back to back. And Harold and I just sort of started interacting. I knew he was in the board game space. I knew he designed a coin game. And there's that term again, coin. I was a little flashback to Andy and Abyss. I'm like, oh yeah, I never did play that. I still kind of bugs me that the game defeated me, that I never quite learned it. And so we got talking a little bit, and that was in 2019. And I mentioned Liberty or Death, and I was just asking, like, is the newest printing like the most up to date printing? I wanted to make sure like all the errata. I didn't want any additional barriers. Like I could tell I was like leaning and going, ooh, I think I might want to try one of these again. And he very kindly offered to send me Liberty or Death. And I'd reached out about Cuba Libre as well, because I'd heard that, again, looking online, I started doing some research. I'd heard that was maybe a good entry into the system. So long story short, and it's kind of late now at this point, it's long story long, they did send a couple copies. I don't normally take copies of games. You might think in my line of business, I get lots of games. I do when I know I'm going to be doing a video for it. But I don't get lots of like just for fun or like just to check out styles of games. Usually I just go buy them myself. But when they offered these two, I was like, yeah, I think I will take them. I will take this gift, this little perk of working in the space that I do. And I still, to this day, have not played Liberty or Death. I feel like it's a grave insult to Harold that I haven't.
It's horrible that you've done. It's shameful.
I know. It's right here. Harold, if you're watching, it's right here. And I will be playing it. But here's the thing. I wanted to give myself the best possible opportunity to enjoy the experience of learning the game. And I had heard from so many people that Cuba Libre was a good entry point. That's where I decided to start. And I'm so glad I did. I'm really glad I did, because honestly, it's not like Cuba Libre was an easy cakewalk into coin. It wasn't. But from my little bit of experience, having now played, I guess, 4, or in the process of playing 4, that video you sent earlier, those games are still set up. Yeah. I have since played 1 full game of Andy and Abyss. We're on our 2nd game of that. Still playing through Colonial Twilight and Distant Plane, the original games. I see N20 Games in the chat. I just want to say hi to N20 as well, a longtime viewer there. So yeah, Cuba Libre was a great entry, but it was still challenging. And what got me actually really fired up to play this, because remember, this was sent to me in 2019.
Yeah.
I didn't touch it until, what was it? I guess the early part of this year, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
It was because one of the other hosts of Watch It Played, Matthew Jude, he had Wilderness War on his shelf. I saw it in the background, another Volko game. And he was like talking about how excited he was to play. I'm like, oh, you play war games? Like, I want to play war games. If maybe there's somebody else here I can join up with. I think that helps a lot, right? You need to have somebody else who's interested in kind of diving in with you. At the very least, you need at least one other person. I know there's lots of solo games, but I needed somebody else to kind of have that kind of energy. And I mentioned I was very interested in Cuba Libre. He had All Bridges Burning, or was very excited in that one. And he very kindly, he rushed out and bought Cuba Libre because he knew I was interested in it. And then I said, look, why don't we take our trepidation, our kind of nervousness around war games and kind of reapproaching them, and let's make that a public thing. Let's share that with our audience. Like, so we did a live stream of trying to learn Cuba Libre,
that was
right?
great. Yeah.
Well, it was 6 hours, and I don't know how watchable it was, but I really enjoyed the experience of it. I really did. I felt like going through that together was kind of the kick I needed to kind of start diving in. I'll tell you something, Fred, like as I read through the rules and I saw it kind of unfolding, the kind of style of gameplay that it was offering was like kindling a little fire here that I haven't felt in a long time around games. Now, I don't want to give anyone the wrong impression. I'm not burning out on board games. I love board games. I love them as much now as I have for years, if not more. But this was a different kind of experience. I guess that's what it was. I was experiencing something new. Oftentimes when I play board games, I'm not experiencing something wildly new. I'm experiencing something that's kind of an iteration of something else I've played before. And oftentimes I'm intrigued and I'm excited to be playing it. But this was something that was tapping into something I haven't experienced in a long while. And it was very, very exciting. And yeah, I should stop talking. It's your turn.
No, but it's I think it's super interesting because in a way, and I would say that, and it's because I came to coin games as a war gamer, and I had the same struggle. So it just to tell you, because it felt so different from what I knew. It was so different from card-driven games. It was so different from hex encounter games that I used to play. And I actually had Colonial Twilight, the one on the war in Nigeria, for a very long time, and that's the one that got me into it because it was a topic I was very interested in.
Oh, interesting.
And I struggled a lot to get into it. I played a bit solo, and for me, what made me shift to coin was COVID, the fact that I had to stay at home, and I started using Discord, and I found a community as you, and was meeting with people, playing with people, and spending some time, and having that sense of working together toward better understanding the system and getting into it. That actually helped me really. So it really resonates a lot what you're saying about even my own experience as a wargamer. So coming from the under angle, it wasn't easy either because it is so foreign.
That's a powerful thing. I'm so glad you mentioned that. That is in both of our stories, there is that power of community or collaboration with somebody else. And that really, I think, makes a big difference, which is why, the qualities of our communities are so important, because that's how other people will join in. Like you've seen, I have been tweeting a fair bit about coin lately, and I just can't help myself. In fact, I'm so glad you invited me on here, Fred, because I feel almost like a fish out of water, sort of, because I think that you've had so many, people on here who are like really experienced with war games, and designers, like, people who've done so much work in this space. I feel a little out of place, frankly, but it's also very cathartic to know I can talk about this here, and your eyes are probably not going to glaze over the way that because once I warn people when they ask me about coin, I say, just beware, once I get going, it might be difficult for me to stop, and I have to like kind of watch them and see their body language and see, am I losing them yet? Okay, maybe let's talk about something else now. But I've really enjoyed, and I feel like I can kind of just talk unfettered here a little bit. But that's one of the things in my own sharing of my enthusiasm for it. I have seen that kind of rippling out to some other people and even my community who are like, oh, I've heard about coin games. Maybe I'll give it a try now or whatever. I got a wonderful text from a friend of mine, Monique, who had been interested and curious. And she sent me a text, and there she was playing Cuba Libre. She'd heard me talking about it, was excited to try it, and some local friends, they were sitting around and playing it, and that just kind of fills my heart with joy. I'm one of those people. I know not every game's going to be for everyone. I would never tell someone who's watching here, oh, you must go out and buy this. You will love this game. I have no idea. Like, everyone's tastes are different, but I know for myself, it's been just an amazing experience playing these games.
And I think you're starting to touch upon one of the key topics that I wanted to discuss today, and that's in your experience and what was tough in the process of learning the game, because your job is about integrating rules and conveying them in an easy way.
Right.
So my expectation is you getting into coin game should be very easy. But on the side, I had some. I think it was Volko who told me, well, that Rodney guy is sending me some video questions about rules question. And it's like, and I thought it was funny just to see how you can struggle with it. And actually, for you to answer that question, I'm going to just announce I have a surprise guest that is actually very curious to hear what you have to say about his rule book. And actually, that was a surprise I wanted to have, is that we also have Volko here. That is
no kidding. Oh, come on. This is too much.
So
Hi, thanks for letting me drop in.
You can complain to him directly, but that was my constraint when you asked how can we do the stream and everything. I was like, oh, Rodney, I think that StreamYard is probably going to be the best option, because I was a bit struggling. And well, so thanks, Volko, for joining and going back to you,
My
Rodney.
pleasure.
So,
it's been great listening.
So for those who don't know, Volko is the creator of the coin series. So that's why. So Volko Runkhe, very happy to have you here. And so back to you, Rodney. So what did you struggle with? Where did Volko fail? Because people don't want to see it. Like, Volko fails sometimes. We can make Volko better.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was gushing right about, like, I'm playing these games, I'm loving it, and I've fallen down the rabbit hole, and now I'm playing 1, I'm playing 4. I've bought all of them. I've got the last 2 on the way, and I'm excited for all the ones I see coming. But it's true. The very start of it was a lot of, like, head in hands kind of, okay, what is it I just read? And kind of wrestling with that learning process. Because when I look on it now, I've taught Cuba Libre, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 times now. And the process of teaching it does not feel difficult to me now. And I'm sure Volko is probably the same for you. You've probably taught these games so many times, it's like second nature. But when I think back to that, those first heady days of, like, sitting with the rule book for the first time and learning it, I was like, it wasn't so easy. So why is that? I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I don't know that I have all of the answers, but I think there is something interesting here. I got some of these rule books here with me. I think there is something interesting about the way they're presented in this format. The rules of play, what I've sort of been feeling lately, because for anyone who doesn't know, generally there's I don't know if this is standard across all of them, but I think this is pretty standard, right? You have a rule book, rules of play, and then a playbook, right? And the rule book it sort of teaches you the rules of the game, or goes through the rules of the game. And then the playbook takes you through people who are playing the game and introduces the rules as they encounter them in sort of like this more sort of natural setting of people playing the game. You're like an onlooker watching these people play, right? And I definitely found the playbook was what sort of unlocked the rules for me going through this. And I think the reason, and that was odd for me in a lot of ways, because I'm usually used to picking up the rule book and learning from that. And that was a sort of a paradigm shift for me. And I think I realized what it was. To me, I believe the rules of play tell you the rules, but they don't necessarily teach you the rules. And this is something I've been sort of toying with in my brain a little bit, like how to express this, because I'm not sure I've quite got all the wording for it, but there's something in there that's sort of, the telling of it is not the teaching of it. Yeah. And they're definitely, all the rules are here. That's one of the things. Like, this is an amazing reference. When I need to, like, look up a rule, it's so quick and easy to find, and there's nothing getting in the way. There's no narrative text surrounding it, generally speaking. It's like, here is the rule in black and white, and with as minimal words as possible, so you just, as long as you follow this, like the words of God, for the most part, you're going to be fine, right? That's what I've discovered. But it does not provide a lot of context for what the rules mean when you're first reading them there. And I encounter this quite a bit in the board game space as well, in a different way. I think of a rule book as kind of like a puzzle, right, that you're putting together when you're first reading it. And sometimes in board game rule books, I'll notice they'll spend, like, maybe the first few pages of the game giving you several different concepts that you'll be using later in the game. Like, maybe they'll define some icons, they'll define some types of actions, they'll define some cards, they'll define all these different things. But at that point in my appreciation of the game, I don't know how any of those things connect together in any meaningful way. It's kind of like someone handing a puzzle piece to somebody and then handing like another puzzle piece, and they don't connect. But they will connect as you get more and more pieces, right? But they keep handing you pieces, and none of them connect yet. And it's like 10 pages in, you've now got the one piece that connects to another piece that connects to another piece, and it starts to come together. And my preferred way, generally in learning something, is to be given a piece that then connects to the next piece you're handed, that then connects to the next piece you're handed. And that, because then there's less cognitive load, I think, on the person who's learning. There's less things I have to just sort of remember that I'll then have to plug in later, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make a lot of sense, and I really like your way of saying it about telling and learning the rules. And actually, I would like to ask you, Volko, is that what you had? I guess that's what you had in mind in the idea of having the playbook and the rule book, and what's your perspective on this, on making the whole system more approachable?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at the rule book for a coin series game, it shows you the genealogy of the series, right? Which is very much out of the war game corner of the hobby and the war game tradition, which is what I come from. So when I'm writing a rule book, my experience goes back to things like the 80-page Empires and Arms,
right,
or whatever it is, right? And if you have a rule book like that, it's just a reference, right? The purpose is, here's a situation. How do we resolve it? The rule book you have to be able to go find unambiguously how to resolve that, right? And so it's almost like, in a more extreme case, think about, it's a legal document.
Yeah.
Think of like a book, a law book, okay? A law book that has all the legislation, the laws in it. Okay, great. I've got this law book. Now I'm ready to practice law. No.
Right.
Now somebody has to teach me all the other stuff and ways of thinking I have to know. And so the purpose of the playbook is to try to provide that.
Right. And it does provide that in spades, frankly. Like that was, because I started kind of in the way I normally start learning games, which is start with the rules. And it was when I went to the playbook, I was like, oh, this is so much more approachable. But it is a different format because it sort of, I'm going to say forces. I don't mean it in the sort of pejorative way it sounds. It forces you to sit through kind of like these four people playing a game, and that's almost in its own way kind of like it's a protracted experience. You know what I mean? Like, okay, I have to follow this person making this decision, and then like it does give you the context, though. It helps you see the context of how things fit together. And so I definitely recommend anyone who's watching start with a playbook, and I do think that's kind of what people would recommend generally, right?
Yeah.
Is that fair? Yeah.
Yes,
I think so. And maybe going back to that, because there is a few questions in the chat that on this. We have Jodu, who is actually, one of his job now is actually to write those playbooks and also to write the rule books, because he's the designer of the latest coin game, the Pure Land. But there we also have someone at Capstone Games that is here, and I think those discussions are going in the same direction. And the questions are around you as the person who had to experience the playbook itself, Rodney. What do you have any ideas or tips of things that you as a player would have made the experience easier? Maybe more strategic tips or more narrative, or what?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was trying to think about that a little bit before, because when you look at the, I'll just keep using Cuba Libre again, just because it's the one I'm the most familiar with, have the most experience with. Although I think Andean Abyss is very close as well. It is the core rules are 11 pages, I think, in here. 11 pages, and I think to provide some of the context that was maybe missing for me, I would say is probably like another 3 or 4 pages of information sort of mixed into this that would provide that little extra language. But the problem that I see with doing that is you are breaking the war game code, I feel like, on some level. And Volko talked about this. This is meant to be like a technical document. It's sort of meant to be a reference more than a learn to play guide. There's in the board gaming space, there's been an evolution here actually towards wargaming. It's funny how these genres are sort of meeting each other in a way. I have a couple of games maybe you've heard of, I don't know, Forbidden Stars or Star Wars Rebellion, okay? And these come with 2 rule books. Opening up a board game, I've been playing board games for years. It's not normal to have 2 rule books in them. Usually you get one. You get one that's how to play. And it's all the rules, and it's written in a more narrative style where someone's kind of talking to you. I would say like a human being, unlike like a technical document, right? Kind of walking you through and holding your hands and explaining context and giving examples. And by the end of it, you go, okay, I get it all. It doesn't make for as great of a reference because there's all that chatter in there explaining things to you, But it does kind of take you through it all at once. However, I think, as this is my guess, the bigger the rule book, the more daunting it appears to the new player. And as a marketing thing, I think some of these board gamers are like, we don't want to hit them with a 20-page rule book. We want to hit them with an 11-page rule book. So let's remove some of the edge case stuff and have this other separate document that kind of, and this is sort of like what I would say is kind of like a core rule book of a coin game, what they call the rules reference, which is just written alphabetically. It takes every rule and sort of puts it alphabetically there and gives you all the rules for that particular rule in that kind of, format, right? Moving units, orbital strikes, moving a ship, morale, and it gives you all the rules related to those key things. So when you're playing the game, you're like, wait, how does morale work again? Here's everything. This is completely unfriendly to read. As a start to finish document, it'd be like reading an encyclopedia. Who does that, right? So you need this to kind of tie it all together. But I've always kind of railed against these a little bit, because when I'm reading this to teach me how to play, I don't know what I don't know. So I don't know to go looking up in here a particular rule that maybe I need when I'm playing. Now, hopefully, of course, when you're playing, you'll know when you need it. You're like, wait, how does this work? And you go looking it up. But I've encountered sometimes, because I'm so particular about rules, I will read these stupid things from cover to cover, and I'll discover a rule there that I'm like, I would never have thought to look that up. I would never have thought to look up, oh, you deal from the bottom of the deck? Because I would just assume you deal from the top of the deck like every other game, right? Or there's some kind of weird thing in there. But this is their attempt, I think, to try to kind of create a rules reference and kind of lighten the load of the rule book for your first game, where you maybe don't need to know everything right up front.
Yeah. But that's, and I think, no, go ahead.
I'll say one last thing. Sometimes when I've gone through both these documents, I'll feel like, you know what? There was probably like about 4 pages of information that's buried in here that if you put it in here, they could have been one document. Like it's not like there's thousands of new rules in here. It's all these same rules again, just written as a reference format, And with the Cuba Libre rulebook, there was a part of me, it's like, if this was written a little more loosely, just a little more casually, could you get everything on 14 pages, but with that kind of context needed to give that new player, here's why you're doing this, here's an example here or there, and would that shorten up the teaching experience? I don't know, but that's my sort of tentative theory. But again, It goes counter to tradition, I think, in some way. But
I think it's a very interesting topic, and it's something I'm thinking a lot about right now. But that's maybe something that we can come back to later during the interview. I think now I would like maybe to open up a bit, because we talked about the rules and the accessibility of the coin game. But as we said, both of us, Rodney and I, for us, like, coin are very different from our other gaming experience. And I would like to ask you, Volko, talk about the design objectives of the coin series. First of all, how did you feel about seeing Rodney, that is someone that is very high profile in the classic board gaming sphere, you could say, starting to play your games? And was one of your intents when you created the coin game series to actually do something that is a bit on the edge, that doesn't look like a war game, and that might bring people in to trick them into playing war games with them not knowing they were playing a war game?
And Volko, how did you feel when you started getting video messages unsolicited from me going, hey, I'm just curious about this rule or that rule?
No, I was very excited because not just because of your reach, but yes, instead of getting a typed out like rules question, I have my own little library of private Rodney videos that one day I think I can auction off profitably. So that was really cool. And to me, it's one sign of there's so many things that have been very exciting for me personally about what's happened with the coin series. But one of them is that there must be some set of audience. There's some, group of people out there in the world who might like and enjoy this series of games. And there's a limit. And then beyond that are just people that, based on what they like or what they're into, are not going to like this kind of game. And what's exciting to me is this many years down the road, I feel like we have not yet found the edges of that box. We're like reaching out, like what are the, walls and ceiling of our potential audience. And we're still, we haven't found it yet. So that's really cool. And it's something I'm really, really proud of naturally. So the original conception for, Andean Abyss was the first one. The original idea was very much in the little war game corner of the world, which was my sense that we were way too focused on a certain narrow set of military history topics, big wars, Normandy 1944, the Napoleonic Wars, that kind of thing. And most wars aren't that. Most conflicts are internal conflicts, guerrilla warfare, and all that throughout the ages, but including in modern times. And there were so many great stories there to tell. And so I wanted to have a little series. I thought 4 games, with a game set on, one in South America, one in Africa, one in Southeast Asia, and one in the Middle East. That was my original idea. And to start with some elements of card-driven games, which was my own design space up to that point, but to depart from it for various objectives. And Colombia just offered this great story, and for very, I think, evenly set factions vying for the future of the country. So it was a perfect topic. And then it was a matter of how do we sell that to the war game audience? Because, because this is just not the kind of topic that they like. And it had a real struggle on the pre-order system for GMT PA500, getting to the number of pre-orders that would get it printed. So I knew that was going to, so I was looking for every little trick I could to add to those pre-orders. And if you look on the box cover to Andean Abyss that, Rodney, you were holding up, it said insurgency and counterinsurgency in Colombia. And then GMT at the bottom said, yes, we really are serious. That's Colombia, South America. No kidding. So we knew that this was not the kind of thing that place that necessarily war gamers, they don't know they want to go there until they find out from you. So how else could I trick people to go get into this game? One was solitaire. Yes, it's a 4-player game, but if you want to play with 3, 2, or even solitaire, you can. That potentially widens the appeal. Right. Another was, well, maybe we can trick some or attract some people who don't and wouldn't play a hex encounter war game, but would play a game with area movement and cubes and placement of cubes to dominate spaces and all of that. And another was make the rule book as short as we possibly can. Yes. Right? Absolutely, that was a part of it. And so on, right? So that's the original intent, is just get the thing to market so that people will see that, yes, insurgency can be an interesting topic, even if you love the Napoleonic Wars.
Yeah, and boy, howdy, can it be. When you were presenting this game to, the traditional war game crowd, did the aesthetics of it, like even the fact that there was a bunch of wooden pieces in it, was that going to be a challenge? Because it's not the look of game I'm used to seeing when I think of a war game.
It probably still is.
Yeah, and we had actually war gamers who did get into it, liked the game, but hated the wooden pieces, and so made their own home versions of little paper squares with numbers on them. Yeah. And the number is 1. It counts as 1 unit.
Sure.
So
change is tough. We see this the same way. In the broader board game space, it's the same thing. You change something, and it can be a lot of resistance to just whether it's a miniature versus a wooden piece, counters and everything else.
And that was another one. Why not use miniatures and so forth? And it's not because we're inflexible or we're wearing blinders or anything like that. No. Look, board games, especially simulation board games, use representation, right? And if it's a figure of a guy, or it's a flat piece with a picture of a horseman on it, or if it's a wooden cube, that's not really what it is. What we're trying to tell you is that is a unit of 1,000 people, of 1,000 troops.
Right.
That is policemen who are effectively patrolling this area of the country, right? These representations are important. Well, these are symbols, and we use symbols readily that we're used to. We're just used to seeing a red octagon means stop the car, right? And to suddenly switch, what if we told you we're going to now strip out all the stop signs are now all going to be yellow triangles, and the yield signs are all going to be red octagons? Is that okay?
Yeah, it'd be pandemonium.
No, it would be a disaster, right? And so So yes, that's right. That's a barrier. So yes, I knew I was going to potentially alienate a few war gamers, but the audience outside of that, potentially, if I could lure the folks who play games about, growing cabbages and stuff like that to play a game about insurgency, that could be a big win. So I risked
So was that always your motivation then with this? Because I mean, obviously you could have gone with chits and other more traditional things. So was that the driving thing, that sort of dream or that vision of, I think this game could appeal more broadly, or maybe even wargaming could appeal more broadly than it does?
Yes, because it developed into that ambition to help try to have the tribes cross breed, to fill in the trough between and have something in between. So I'm saying, okay, Panzer pushers playing East Front, come over here. You might, this Columbia. It's interesting,
Right.
and cabbage growing folks. Yes, I understand insurgency. It sounds like it's kind of a little serious, but actually it's a very interesting story and can be fun to play. Come over here, right? So it was both of those. But part of it also was a vanity project, because I had done previously for GMT Games, I'd done Labyrinth. And in Labyrinth, I went ahead and I put, I'm gonna see if I can afford 15 cubes for each side. And it evolved 50. It's mainly counters and cards and stuff, but it has a few little wooden pieces in it. And the jihadist pieces, we needed a way to have them be, in effect, hidden or revealed. And so came up with the idea of having an octagonal cylinder, and it would flip. And I thought we put a sticker on one side to show that it's revealed. Tony Curtis at GMT says, don't use stickers because it'll get a bunch of grungy stuff on the edges of the sticker. It won't look nice. We can emboss them. And I embossed them. And they came out with these, to me, just absolutely gorgeous little black pieces with little green crescent on them. And I was like, wow, I wish I had more than 15 of them. Will GMT let me put in like 70, and I'm going to do this. So that was the idea for the Guerrillas, came from Labyrinth, the War on Terror. And I thought maybe I can go mad and have like, over 100 pieces in it. And some of them will be embossed, and will GMT go for it? And they did. So
be careful, Volko. This is where you end up with these giant Kickstarters with hundreds and hundreds of plastic miniatures. It all starts with, this wooden piece with a little embossment on it.
Look how cool. But I don't know what it is. I happen to find the wooden pieces beautiful. And
they are amazing. And you talked a lot about the topics, Volko, and the fact that you wanted to bring new topics in the wargaming sphere that is usually very World War II and all those kind of things. And I wanted to ask you, Rodney, how do you feel about this? And when you started discovering those games, did you have the feeling that those were a way for you to discover some topics that you didn't knew about? Do you think that they were a good way to get introduced to those topics? And did the outcome of it was to actually pick up a book and read more about it, or did it get you interested in specific historical topics afterwards?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that actually, Fred, because certainly part of the attraction was that the subject matter has some weight. It's like, look, there's lots of wonderful lore behind other genres of games, like Star Wars Rebellion and 40K and all these sorts of things. But in approaching something that has a historical reference, we're talking about real human stories here that people have lived and experienced on some level. And what I found in playing the game is it inspired me to have an interest in the history behind it. I wanted to understand it better. And it did lead me to, first of all, going through the excellent resources that already exist in these playbooks. Like, these games come with some designer notes, historical context for why things were designed the way they were, and what were motivating some of the decisions and actions that players were given in the game. I found a fantastic a documentary series on Netflix called Cuba Libre, which is I think a 10, 12 part that goes through the history before the conflict that's represented in this game, and I think after as well. And that just enriched the experience of playing it and better understanding it. And also gave me a greater appreciation for the design choices that were made. This 2 weeks, I guess it was last weekend, I sat down with the playbook for Andean Abyss, which I don't have handy right now, and Colonial Twilight. And I just sat there to read the history that's included in there, the historical notes, because I didn't have as much familiarity with this particular conflict that's represented in Andean Abyss. And that reading gave me a greater appreciation for what we were doing in the game. And also, it's I mean, I don't want to get too philosophical here because I feel like I'm just sort of scratching the surface of sort of an appreciation about this, but it also reveals something. I mean, these games are looking at conflicts at a very high level, right? But it does reveal something about human psychology on an individual level, I think somewhat. Wants and desires and how you achieve them, sometimes like to devastating results. It's a fascinating thing to get a glimpse into. And I think it allows the games to be, yes, fun, but also to have a certain level of seriousness to them as well, as you think about the topics. And that's the other thing. There's so many things I could say about the Coin series. But as I've encountered each one, like Colonial Twilight, I know nothing about that conflict whatsoever. And because of playing this game, not only have I learned more about the conflict, but I learned things about the conflict through the design choices that are made there. As I was playing it with another friend who was also playing it for the first time, we were trying to appreciate why our game was going so poorly. we came over from playing, Cuba Libre, and we're sort of playing this game the same way. I mean, in terms of how we were approaching the strategies of play. So we were getting into it and fighting each other and, kind of scrapping. Because that's like Cuba Libre is kind of like a knife fight in a phone booth. Like it's very close quarters, And here we were sort of doing the same thing, wrestling over like the same couple of areas. And there's this wide, expansive map. And we sort of halfway through, we're like, what's our victory conditions here? What are we really trying to do? And let's think about this thematically. What are we trying to do? And Colonial Twilight's a game about, a country that is trying to sort of relieve itself of the colonial rule of France, right? And what is it how do they accomplish that? It's not necessarily about getting into day-to-day scraps. It's, I think the other friend I was playing with, Dave, he said, it's kind of the optics. Like the more entrenched these insurgents can get, even if it's in areas where there's not high populations, this is going to look like a country that is slipping out of the grips of France. And then France has to ask itself, how much energy and resources and time do we want to invest in keeping our colonial rule here? So it becomes almost an optics game in a way. Like, even though all these bases are being established in areas that are not very populated, that has a big impact on the optics of it. And just going through and then reading some of the history, again, kind of dovetails into that appreciation of what's going on there. Like I said, barely scratching the surface of it, but it does give you an appreciation for how the coin system allows you to simulate very different things, very different types of conflicts, irregular conflicts, as you said.
And just to build upon that, Volko, coming in from a completely different angle, did you, as a designer, in the process of making one of those con games, did you feel it was an interesting process for you to better know more about the conflict? Because I guess that in the process of designing the game, you have the whole research phase, and then you're thinking about abstracting some of those optics that Rodney was talking about. How can I create mechanism that would be a good representation of that? Did you also have the feeling as a designer that in the process of designing those games, it was a different way to approach history and to learn about it?
Oh, absolutely, and very powerfully, and every time, not just with the Coin series. One thing to realize is another origin of the series in Andean Abyss is that in my day job, we were using board games to teach analysts, such as military analysts. We used games about insurgency to teach insurgency, and so we already knew that simulation board games are a very powerful medium for conveying to somebody else, here's how we think this thing worked. This is what the insurgent strategy is. These are their ends, victory conditions. These are their ways, game mechanics, player actions. These are their means, cubes and resources and so forth, right? And you can see it all in action. So when you try to teach higher level students, say it's at the graduate level, a great way to do it is you have them design a game. And they have to research it and defend it. There are professors who use that method to teach military history, and it's very powerful and effective. So when you have to design a game, it's not just that you're reading a bunch of stuff about it, and because I was like, you have to take your mental model and express it concretely in a rule set and components that will work and produce historically plausible results. And you very quickly discover the gaps in your understanding, because when you're talking about understanding complex human affairs, like a war or a political system or an economy, you always have gaps in your mental model, because that's why we call it complex system, right? And to boil that down to a dynamic model that on the tabletop works, operates, and produces plausible results, you have to fill those gaps in somehow. And so as you go through that process, even if you're an expert, and I wasn't already an expert on Columbia or anything like that, I had access to experts on Columbian insurgency. That was cool. But even if you are, I found this, time and again, you've studied a topic for decades. If you then create a board game about it, you will find out gaps in your understanding. You will be asking and answering questions you probably had not yet.
Well, that's one of the things that's interesting with the coin game. Sorry, Fred, I'll just say something quick and I'll
go ahead.
The card play in the coin games almost presents that, right? Because there's usually two event options to pick from. One being, I believe, sort of what historically happened, and one being what could have happened otherwise. And that's the thing, too, that's interesting when you look at these historical situations and you see how they played out. Of course, hindsight's 20/20, right? But things could have played out differently if events had taken a slightly different turn. And I think the coin games do a wonderful job of reflecting that and giving you that pause to think about these key moments in history. And if it had gone a different way, what would the situation look like now?
And if I just respond to that in terms of think how powerful that is for thinking about history and therefore about humanity. Because we're used to thinking about history of, well, these things happened. It was a narrative. It's done. There was this thing, then that thing, then that thing, right? But that's not the way it was. It was all kinds of possibilities at the time, right. And the people participating didn't know how it was going to go. And it could have gone in a whole, a bell curve of potential possibilities, right? With a game, you look at it that way, the way it really was, a system of multiple possibilities. And you formulate ideas about, well, what does that bell curve look like? What was an unusual event and what was pretty much near the middle of the probability? And now you're really understanding the complexity of human affairs in the way that just a narrative of this happened and that happened never can tell you.
That's brilliant. Now that you have this in your mind, Rodney, if you were, and just to bring this question up, because I think it's an interesting one. Now that you're thinking about it, if you were to design a coin game yourself, if you had the time, what topic would you like to work on? Just a bit saying, maybe opening the question about which coin game you would like to see appear.
Well, I'll tell you something. First of all, you already stole it. Congratulations, Robin Hood. We should talk about that a little bit later. I'll tell you something. That's the other thing. I'll answer the question, but it's so funny. I was reading the rules to your upcoming coin game. Or is it called the coin game? Is it called now? We've got new names, right? It's like the irregular coin series or something. I forget.
Yeah, irregular conflict series.
Conflict series. That's it.
But I think, and Volko said it first. It's like it has like most of the coin DNA in it. So it's just it's a reinterpretation of it, but it's very much a coin game. Yeah.
Yeah. When I first heard there would be a Robin Hood one, I was very excited because Robin Hood's my favorite fictional kind of hero. But I was reading the rules. I'm like, it works so perfectly. They are insurgents, of course they are, and of course Nottingham's the government, and it all sort of fits. And yet again, the coin system gives you so much room to play, to tweak this little thing here, tweak that little thing there, and create these new elements that make it Robin Hood, not just a reskinning of the rule set. All these games are not like carbon copies of each other. That's the other thing. Like Gandhi, it's got a faction apparently that doesn't fight. Of course it does, because it's about Gandhi, right? Like, what does that even mean? I don't know. I can't wait to find out. Every time I've played one, I've been just so impressed with the diversity of the style of play and the rules of play. Okay, you asked a question. Sorry, it's difficult for me not to gush. I don't know. I've thought about this a little bit because I've often said people will say anyone who plays board games will eventually want to design a game. Or have an idea for a game. And I've sort of always resisted that. When I was in my youth, I did spend a lot of time like writing out game rules. But as I got older, I'm like, I'm happy for someone else to do the work. And I just want to come in and play in their playgrounds. But I will confess, having played a few coin games, I've thought, boy, this seems like it'd be like a fascinating space to try to like replicate a conflict in. I don't feel like I'm well equipped right now to sort of apply certainly a historical setting to such a thing. So I don't know. I don't actually have an answer to this question, which is a terrible answer on a live stream to a question, but I don't know.
I will keep the answer Robin Hood, and I will just and I will dedicate the game A Jest of Robin Hood to you, Rodney. I will put your name in the playbook saying it's mainly for Rodney that I'm doing it.
Well, I'll tell you, when I was reading the rules, I was, even though, again, it's such an abstraction, right? Like as Volko said, like one piece represents potentially hundreds of thousands of or thousands of units or whatever, right? You're talking an abstraction. But even as I was reading the rules, I was seeing the delightful characters romping around in the forest and, raiding the carriages, and the sheriff back there just pounding his fist on the table. I guess I could just see all that coming to life. There's a lot of life in these games. It isn't just simply an abstraction or this sort of like there's a power to the games, I think, in both the aesthetic and presentation and the mechanics that really do bring a lot of life to it. When I'm playing these games with my friends, we are having a great deal of fun as well, in addition to sort of this sort of serious setting that we're in and that it's representing. So, and that's the important thing, Volko, I suppose, too, right? As you create this simulation, it is a game at the end of the day, and also has to provide interesting choices and challenges and be fun and have a semblance of balance and all these other things that are, of course, important too, right?
It absolutely does. And yet this is, I think, what's important for the war game tradition is a lot of the fun does come from the simulation, comes from what I like to call time tourism, right? It's transporting me somewhere. And in the case of a historical game, that somewhere was real. These were people really lived and did this. And so, and that is, it's not the whole fun. There has to be, of course, interesting gameplay, agency, balance, all of that. But it's a big part of the fun, at least in my tradition out of conflict simulations.
I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this question while I have you here, because it's something. Freddie, do you mind if I ask?
No,
it?
Go ahead. But I'm just saying, be careful, Rodney. We're getting dangerously close to the 1 hour mark.
I assumed we're going to go for 2 hours at this point. No, listen. I just want to ask a question, because you came out with this as the first game in the series, Volko, right? And then the other releases since then have sometimes shared your name but had another designer, right? Mm-hmm. In some cases, like I see with Liberty or Death, your name is not on the cover of this one in particular. But you've been involved, right, somewhat in most of the games, at least on some level. And I've wondered what that's been like for you to sort of have. I guess I'm asking an ego question here a little bit. Like, it's your baby, right? It's kind of your baby, this thing that you've developed, and now it's in other people's hands, and they're putting their own spins on it. What has that been like for you? Has there been any kind of little bit of like letting go that's had to happen, like a process of letting go, like I've got to let that go, or has it been easy to let go? Like, what's that been like for you?
It's been very fulfilling, and it's another of the exciting aspects of the phenomenon is how quickly talent came in to pick up and do things that I never would have thought of. And to me, it allows me to compare myself a little bit to one of my war game design heroes, and that's Mark Herman. Mark Herman essentially invented what we now call card-driven games, but it isn't something that he tried to, put a stranglehold on and say, well, this is a Mark Herman thing. It was a gift to the community and to the hobby. And so I picked that up and took it in some first very similar directions to what Mark and others had done, and then some very different directions. And the Coin series has that genealogy. And so now to end up with now things like just the Robin Hood, well, that's just fantastic. And it happened so quickly because, as I said, my original idea was I'm going to do 4 volumes. It's just me, because who else is interested in insurgency but me? And before Andy and Abyss was out, Jeff Grossman said, this could work really well for the Cuban Revolution. And I said, okay, then design it. And we did it together, and that's Cuba Libre. And I never got around to my other volumes because there were so many opportunities like that popping up, including, excitingly for me, with Mark Herman to do in Vietnam with Fire in the Lake. And what could be more awesome than to have a whole community, a Discord server, and so many different designers doing things that, so Brian Train, we did the Afghanistan game together. Brian Train, his earlier games on insurgency were an important inspiration for the Coin series. Brian and I did a game together, and then he decides to do Algeria 2-player. And I mean, my reaction to that was, Brian, you missed the whole point of the Coin series, 2-player. What are you talking about?
Right.
It can't, it doesn't make any sense, and it's awesome. So,
Yeah.
I couldn't be more thrilled with that. That we now have, something to enjoy that was beyond my conception.
Well, I think the system is richer for it. I mean, that's great that you were able to kind of have that kind of attitude towards something that obviously I'm sure was a real labor of love for you, and obviously was not easy to necessarily get off the ground at first, and so it's nice that others are now perhaps enjoying a slightly easier experience of getting their coin games in front of people because of the reception.
The apocryphal thing was that Henry Ford said, if I'd asked my customers what they would have wanted to have, they would have said a faster horse, right? You have to, I mean, this is natural. We don't know that we want an iPad until there's an iPad.
Right.
And so we did have to get over that hump, and excitingly, it worked. And it turns out that, yes, indeed, there are interesting stories here to experience.
I do think I want to affirm what you said earlier. You talked about reaching the edges. Like you always, again, there is an edge to like how many people will want to play a particular game. And I think you are correct in presuming that there is still more. I think the system is really interesting and fascinating. I think there's more themes, because that's the other thing. Some people ask, like, which one should I get into? I tend to, coming from a concern about making sure people are clear on rules, I go with the easy one first. But I really do think that there's such a breadth now of themes and settings that if you're really drawn to this particular setting, that's a great place to start, because it'll help give you that motivation to get over maybe that initial learning hump. And when you do, the thing that's waiting on the other side for you, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
So that would be your recommendation, Rodney, if someone were asking you which should be the first coin game that I would start, because of the wealth of themes, would say, well, pick the topics that you're the more interested in, or
it's tricky. I would probably, and this is just my own personal bias, I have such a my primary interest, generally speaking, when I'm teaching a rule to a game, rules to a game to somebody new, is to get them on board so they don't feel confused, so they don't feel lost, so they can get into the game and start playing. And so the simpler the rule set, the easier it is for that to happen. And so if, for example, sometimes a game will come out and they'll say, here's the basic rules and then here's the advanced rules. Some people like to just jump right into the advanced rules with new players. I almost never want to do that. I almost always want to start at the basic rules, even if it means I'm playing, let's say, quote unquote, less of a game than I want to be playing, because I want them to get comfortable and have a place of place and have agency in the game, not be constantly going, wait, how does this work again? So I want them to be really comfortable with the rules first. So I would probably say, look, if you have the opportunity to play Cuba Libre first, that's probably where I would point somebody. Because once you have that under your belt, boy, does it ever open up I mean, you're 90% of the way there on many of the other ones. Now, I say that again, with a limited experience. I haven't played all of them yet. I hear Fire in the Lakes adds quite a bit more. I don't know. I'm looking forward to finding out. It's part of the reason, actually, why I haven't played Liberty or Death yet. Because my personal, again, my bias is, I've heard this one's a little more complicated, got a few more things going on under the hood. So it's like, well, then I'm going to start with one of the easier ones, learn that, really hopefully master it, and then graduate up to something a little more involved. Because again, that's my preference in approaching complicated rule sets.
And you, Volko, would you have a recommendation to get to learn the series, or would you have more or less the same approach? Go with the theme that you're the more inspired by?
Yeah, I mean, not very different. I think if you're really interested in the Napoleonic Wars at the strategic level, you will buy a game with an 80-page rule book, apparently. So,
right.
if you're really interested,
passion will go a long ways.
Passion will go a long way, and particularly
really
in simulation games. And it's helpful too. It's not just that you have the energy, but you have the points of reference, right?
Yes,
you know what's being represented. If you are into the Vietnam War, it's probably going to be easier for you to enjoy learning Fire in the Lake than Liberty or Death.
That's absolutely, that's a great point.
Because you're relating to something. Yeah. And so, but if that's not the case, if you're interested in a series of games and you're just like, these all sound kind of equally interesting, then sure, why not go? I mean, Cuba Libre has the fewest literal moving parts, fewest spaces, fewest pieces. the rules aren't any simpler than Andy and Abyss. There's just
agreed.
less stuff,
Yeah.
and that's helpful.
Yeah, I agree with everything Volko said. I think the thing that can't be discounted is if you're passionate about something, you're excited about something, if the theme speaks to you, that will get you over, any number of rules, because you'll be wanting to, and vice versa. Like, if you're not interested in the theming, then even a small rule set won't help you. Like, because you're just not going to be as invested necessarily.
Because the game is trying to take you to someplace.
Yeah,
it's a place you don't want to go.
Right.
Yeah, it just doesn't work out.
Yeah.
I think that's that's a very good conclusion. And I will just ask to you one final question, Volko. Now that the Levian campaign series seems like it's taking off, and I've been on the Coin Discord server of the Levian campaign series, it looks like it's going to live its own life, a bit like the Coin series itself did. Can we expect you to come back and design another coin game, or that's or you're going to create a new, completely different series for people to be obsessed about?
It's unlikely, and to kind of address the question you were answering earlier, Rodney, I'm still involved, and the Coin series is under the management of the highly talented and capable Jason Carr at GMT Games. He's director of development there.
Don't be too nice with him; he gets annoying when you do that.
Yeah, well, he has to be. It takes a tough man to make a tender chicken. So there's not really an efficiency there, because there are so many folks like you with new ideas and new approaches that I'm a little bit redundant. And yes, it's game design is time consuming, and I have big ambitions within Levian campaign and other stuff. And so yes, that's the journey I'm on right now.
Good. And you'll always be invited to talk about it here. And Rodney, I'm going to say it officially. If you want to come and have a game of any coin game you would like, and you want to stream it, I'm more than happy to, either privately or live, having fun of having that collective experience of learning a new one. Personally, I never played Liberty or Death, so that could be one that we could explore. But it was awesome to have the two of you here today. I will just finish by saying a few things, a couple of updates on the channel. As I was saying at the beginning, I was originally taking a bit of a break of YouTube, and I would come back at the end of the month. And we have a few things that are planned. Some of them are actually involving Volko in a way, because I will have some. We're organizing some interviews of participants of the Zenobia Awards. So we're going to have some people coming in talking about their games. Nothing is finalized yet, but we're in the works for doing this when I'll be coming back. We're also going to have episode 2 of the Wargames Book Club for those of you who are interested. And the book is When Titans Clashed. So if people want to join, and I will communicate a bit more about this. And we're going to have a few live streams coming up next. So Napoleon 1806 by Shaco's Games. And actually, we should be playing People Power with Jason Carr and Joe Dewhurst at some point. So People Power is a 3-player coin game on the Philippines. You might be interested in that, Rodney.
I'm very excited. I've backed that one as P500, that one as well. I mean, all of them. I'm completely in now. Yeah, it's I don't see it stopping anytime soon. I have to say, Fred, thank you so much for inviting me to be on here and to just gush and kind of talk openly about some of the enjoyment I've had. I love that people joined here. Hopefully enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for surprising me with the special guest, Volko. It was a pleasure, Volko, to get to talk to you, and not just through a video recording, but sort of in live, and to hear your thoughts. It's I want to thank you, for the and I always said this to you privately, but sort of pushing through on this vision for these games, because I think as you even confessed, your vision for it was not even as big as it's now become, right? Yeah. But the ideas you had for it and what it could be have created such memorable gaming experiences around the table for me. And I know that's been true for a lot of people. And that's a really powerful thing, like if you sat there and you're designing and you're working things out, and it translates, years down the line to, 4 people sitting around a table, not even sitting at the table, sitting like remotely. I'm playing with friends who are in completely different countries, and we're having this shared experience together that's just so wonderful. And it's because of these designs that you worked on and others have. And it's a wonderful thing. We're all very thankful. I'm sure you've heard it many times.
Thank you. That's very delightful for me to hear, and especially for you to say that.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks to all of you. Thanks for the one who joined the chat. It was fun to have you there. And
Yes.
everyone have a great day, except for Sean, who's in Australia. It's midnight, so have a good night. And,
Good night, John.
and everyone can have a great day. See you. Bye.
Cheers. Bye now.